Welcome. I'm really glad you're tuning in wherever you happen to be right now. My name is Melvette Hill, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Commission on Women, Children's, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity here in Connecticut. On behalf of the Commission, welcome to our new podcast, the Policy, Innovation, and Civic Health Podcast. We are starting with the series on America 250, a project close to our hearts, and one we believe arrives at a genuinely meaningful moment in American life. This year, the United States turns 250, 2.5 centuries since a founding declaration was, at once, visionary and incomplete. It was a finish line, or maybe it wasn't a finish line. It was an opening argument, and every generation since has had to decide, are we going to keep making that argument better? Are we going to extend its promise further? We think the answer has to be yes. And we think Connecticut has a real role to play in that work. The CWCSEO was created to do something specific. By statute, we are charged with addressing issues that affect women, children and their families, older adults, and communities that too often have been overlooked. African Americans, Latino and Puerto Ricans, Asian American and Pacific Islander residents across our state. These are not separate concerns sitting side by side. They are deeply interconnected, and the well-being of each shapes the well-being of all. That's the lens we bring to this series. As we mark America 250, we're not simply looking back at 250 years of history. We're asking a forward-facing question. What does the American dream look like in 2026 and beyond? And how do we build a version that is genuinely within reach for every person in Connecticut? What does access to opportunity actually feel like when it's real? And what does civic life look like when people are truly seen and heard? And so through these conversations, you'll hear from residents, advocates, community leaders, and people with lived experience across communities we serve in our state. Some episodes will challenge comfortable assumptions. Some will lift up stories that don't get enough airtime. All of them are rooted in the belief that real civic engagement means more than just casting a ballot. It means being part of an ongoing conversation about the kind of place we want Connecticut to be and the kind of place we want our country to be. So this podcast is one way we are honoring our commitment to connect people with each other and with their government, not as an afterthought, but as a foundation. So we invite you to listen in, share these episodes with someone in your community, and let these conversations spark something, a question, a connection, maybe even an action. This work belongs to all of us. Thank you for being here, so let's begin. So Elaine is our guest today, Elaine Zimmerman. And Elaine, you have had an incredible career across sectors and in state government and also federal government. So tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Give us your brief bio.
Well, first, let me just say how happy I am to be here in Melvette on a 250-year anniversary birthday celebration. Yes. It's wonderful. My work began in California, and it interestingly began with a civic lens. The first work I did out there was to give tape recorders to women, young women who were on the street. They were 12, 13, 14, and they were runaways. At the time, none of it made sense. And I succeeded in getting a foundation to give me money to give the runaways tape recorders as a way to tell their stories. So it was really about bringing voice to something, but I didn't know what. And to my surprise, they were being trafficked by the mafia and drugged, and several of them were disappearing. And this work led to my writing up what happened, and that was my first experience beginning to work with a mayor who called me immediately and said, what should we do? What is the policy? That led to work in trafficking and runaways and changing law in California. And then after that, once again, it was civics. There was the beginning of what was called the feminization of poverty that was coined by Diana Pierce. And she was noticing that many, many more women across the United States were becoming poor. I noticed that at the same time, we had, for the first time, the gender gap. And I suggested we combine them, that if we took poor women who were becoming more and more in poverty, and we moved the vote there, maybe then we could reverse women's poverty.
Wow.
And I began to work in California, interestingly enough, with Congresswoman Bella Abzug, who hired me to work on this. It was called it was actually a major effort linking the feminization of poverty, the gender gap, so taking a very depressing thing and combining it with power.
Wow.
And I don't know if this is going to show, but I brought it. I found it. So this made it to the front page of the New York Times. It went national, and California had the highest turnout of women voters in the United States.
Can you read it out loud for those who are listening in?
Sure. It's really a sort of metaphor. You take two opposing things. So it was 2 out of 3 adults in poverty are women. What if we were all to go to the polls? And we organized in California, and all the women did. There was the highest turnout of women voters in the whole country and the highest turnout in California. That work led to my working for the California legislature. So I came to learn law and human services, and with work with Willie Brown, who was the Speaker of the House, I suggested that part of the problem in human services was that we had no family policy. And he said, I think you're right. Let's set up a committee on the family. You're in charge of it. Mm-hmm. And so that was a major beginning. And interestingly, it linked me to Senator Larson here, because I wanted to bring together the states that were doing the best on families, and California and Connecticut were the 2 states. So Connecticut started working with California, and then I had opportunity to move to Connecticut and began to work in the Connecticut legislature, working on a host of things, but early on, early childhood. And then that work led to realizing that parents wanted to be engaged but didn't know how, and developed with parents the Parent Leadership Training Institute.
Yes, and that was in 1992.
Yeah.
And then for our listeners, just so you all know, I've said this before on a few different podcasts, but I am a graduate of the Parent Leadership Training Institute. I graduated in Danbury, and I was the class of 2004. Please go on, Elaine.
And it was such fun to work with you then,
Yes.
all the way through. So I came to learn through the Connecticut legislature and various mentors in the state how to really work on policy, but to do it from the ground. Once again, civics and democracy, really working with parents to determine what needed to happen. Mm-hmm. What should school readiness look like? Why weren't we not at proper literacy levels in grade 3? How do we redefine how we teach reading? So I helped with the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus and helped to bring in the proper research so we could change how we were teaching reading, the science of reading in Connecticut. I had opportunity to work with youth and young children on being bullied, and had opportunity to write the anti-bully laws that were the first in the United States. And there were major leaders here who mentored me along the way, but it's the marriage of community and research and law that I learned, and then that got me to the federal government, where I became in charge of the 6 states in New England, and was this sort of between person between the federal government and federal needs and state needs and the ground. An example of that would be COVID. So when COVID hit, what were states learning, what were families seeing, and how do I translate that to the very top? So we changed things immediately. Yeah. So there we are.
Thank you. And so for those who are just tuning in, we are here with the fantastic, phenomenal woman, Elaine Zimmerman. And so Elaine, something that I've been doing with the commission is starting these civic sit-downs. So we're going out into community and really challenging people to have conversations across difference. And that's certainly something I learned when I was in the Parent Leadership Training Institute. And so we're taking this idea of having civic dialogue, and we're going into places like little restaurants and coffee houses, and we're inviting people to have a snack with us and to have a conversation. And we're making it really simple. Asking like 2 or 3 questions just to get people to start to open up. And so when we do our civic sit downs, we do it with the question. We start with a question that's personal but light, because we believe that building a stronger democracy starts with knowing each other just a little better. And so here's one of the questions for you, Elaine. This is one of the questions we ask. What is your favorite book, movie, or podcast focused on democracy or civic engagement, and why?
Yeah, that's such a fun question.
Yeah.
So I would say the collected works of Langston Hughes.
I'm gasping. I love Langston Hughes. How did you know?
I didn't.
I know.
But I'm not surprised. I think Langston Hughes's poetry really immediately shows what we need to do in our country to honor and praise difference, and also speaks to those who are marginalized. And he would, in the strongest voice, show what happens when people are marginalized. I love the poem called Harlem, but which begins with "What happens to a dream deferred?" I loved that line. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? I think so simply and yet so strikingly, he masters what needs to be said. And also his poem, "I Too Sing America,"
yes,
which is just so beautiful. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. And he shows, tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. That's when we do embrace diversity, when we do embrace difference. Nobody will dare say to me, "Eat in the kitchen," then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
Yes, beautiful, and such timely pieces to pull out in this conversation that we're having, and also in this moment in our history. I am from Harlem, and so I am very well familiar with his writings and that poem, and so I just had chills when you were reading those words, as they resonate so deeply for me as an African American woman, as a woman who shows up in this space as Black. So I think so timely. So Elaine, as we, and such a great choice, the book. So one of the phrases that we keep coming back to in this series around America 250 is the American dream. And it's one of those ideas that almost everyone has a feeling about. Some people grew up reaching for it. Some people have questioned whether it was meant to include them. And some are actively imagining what it could become. And so I want to ask you directly, how do you define the American dream, or are you redefining it for 2026?
Well, it's such a good question. I mean, the American dream really comes from the Declaration of Independence, where we are told that all men are created equal and that we have the opportunity for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And it really, the American dream translates to everybody has the right to a home and to upward mobility regardless of class, regardless of difference. And, 17 years ago, there was a poll on the American dream. And 2/3 of those surveyed believed they had achieved the American dream, or they could. And that included a very high percentage of people whose income were under $30,000. And now 50% of the public does not believe the American dream is achievable. So in 17 years, that's a dramatic shift that we're seeing of hope to this is not going to happen for me. And so I think we really have to understand what that gap is and fill it deeply, carefully, and with really precise stitchery so that we know what has happened, that you can go from 3/4 of the public believing that this is achievable and believing the sort of fundamental roots of democracy and why we became a separate country, to where we are now, where 12% of youth, only 12% of youth have faith in government, 12%. So I think, to your question, we are in trouble right now, and we need to mend deeply the flag. We're in trouble in diversity. We have people very scared in our country now. We have children not going to school because of their skin color. We have in towns people going to people's homes and bringing the children to school because the parents are afraid to take the children to school. We're seeing a decline in the number of children going to school out of fear. With the focus on racial difference being a problem rather than a joy, I think we have to flip this really fast. I think voting is in serious trouble with the redistricting, gerrymandering people into silence. There's people being pushed out of voting, and voting's being made more difficult, with the Supreme Court decision recently dismantling the key protections of the Voting Rights Act for guaranteed communities of color the right to fair congressional districts. I think that diversity, voting, civics is in trouble. Respect for government. I think that the public, including this example I gave of youth, are believing that government is a foul. And there are plenty of things that need to be improved in federal and state government. We need to make government more efficient, and we need to create much deeper and quicker feedback loops between the customer and the actor who is proceeding with whatever the policy, implementing the policy. But I think that respect for government is, we have to get back to people really understanding what government does. The rule of law is at risk. There's a real distance from Congress and too much focusing on one branch of government. I also think that safety, violence is becoming the norm. And there's a real focus on opposition now, so that children and youth aren't seeing or learning how to debate, how to really enjoy difference and discuss it and understand that that depth of different views actually makes for something extraordinarily beautiful. But that is gone right now, and we very quickly need to get back to that.
Yeah, and that's a lot to unpack, but all of it is so relevant to right now, right? I'm not sure that I would just agree with anything that you said. It takes me back to, as you were listing out those things where we need improvement, where things have broken down, where things are disintegrating. It brought me back to those two poems that you read by Langston Hughes. I too am America. And so as I heard you list out those things, it made me wonder how those of us who consider ourselves to be Americans, whether they have citizenship or not, whether they live in this country and they're here because they were pursuing an American dream, however they define that or saw it, it makes me think about our responsibility to those things, and what is it that we can be doing, each of us in our own way, to bring hope, to go back to maybe some of those original intentions of the Declaration of Independence, where we know that all men were not free or equal, but this hope for something better, right? I think that we all can agree that the people who came here and left England and came here were looking for something better. So I wonder, like, what our role is in seeking the better, in doing something to make things better. And then I also wonder what happens to a dream deferred, right? Does it shrivel up and die? Or can it be resuscitated? Can it be made new? Can we plant new seeds so that there is hope? So I wonder in this moment, Elaine, like, where might we find hope for the next 25 years? As we look at our current state, the things that you listed out, where might we find hope? What would you tell our audience today?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question. When I looked at the data on youth's attitude towards government and saw that only 12% believed in government now, the piece that was hopeful was 65% of that same cohort believed in their peers. They believed in each other. And so I think that is an argument for peer-to-peer work, for people doing things together. I think that what is happening now is happening so fast, whether it's dangers in our community, war, changes in law, tariffs, the economy, cost of food. People are overwhelmed, Melvet. And I think when people become overwhelmed, they become a little bit like a heron bird just looking straight down into the water. It's sort of like, no, I'm not going to do anything. This is overwhelming. I don't know what to do. And so I think it's a time to not feel that one has to do enormous, bold strokes, that going to where one feels hopeful themselves and expanding that, paying attention to one other person, two other people in your apartment, in your neighborhood, connecting at your church or synagogue or mosque, really looking where you already go, where you already walk, and enhancing that step, one step at a time. Right now, will become contagious. And so I think we have to go where hope is in our heart and go there. And then I think we have to trust our voice. Wherever it is, we need to speak up 2, 3, 4 staircases, because it is the silence. I mean, I remember I was a federal employee, and there has been a recent effort to dismantle civil service. There's been a real effort to undo all the government workers with a belief that we are what's called deep state. That is, we're all somehow undoing the president's views. My peers in the federal government that I know all entered the government because of their belief in democracy, not because of one particular president's views. And what I am observing is even those of us who were thrown out overnight and perceived as ill-serving the president, we're all still working in democracy. We're all still doing things to help children learn to speak, to find out what the community wants. I think the commitment to civics in whatever form is hopeful to the individual and possible, so you don't feel like it's beyond your reach.
Thank you for that. I do think there's hope. I like what you said. Hope is in our heart, right? And so it reminds me of Whitney Houston singing "The Greatest Love of All," right? I don't own the rights to this song, but I'm going to say the words, right? And she says, "I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride," right? And so I think that, our young people are underestimated. And I do believe that hope is the very heart of democracy. But if we look back over time in probably many centuries, we will see that young people were the ones who got things done. They were the ones in the civil rights movement who got things done, even before that. So even if we look like Tiananmen Square, like it was young people. When we look across the world, across the globe, it's young people doing the things, really pushing for change. And so I think in these next 25 years, there needs to be an investment in our young people. I do believe that as we look across Connecticut, and I'm sure other states, I can name a few in Tennessee as well, you're seeing a lot of young leaders pop up in our state legislatures. We have a lot of, 20-somethings, and it is phenomenal and it is amazing, and they are great leaders. There's this conversation around the next 250 years. And quite frankly, not unless there's some big scientific discovery, I'm not going to be here, and neither will you, not in the next 250 years, right? But we can be building for the next 25, right? I'm hoping I'll be around in 25, but we can be building. And part of that building is investing in young people, investing in those who have lost interest in government, as well as hope and faith and belief in those who are governing. But if we prepare them to lead, right, if there's an investment in their leadership, yes, I do think things like education are super important, and all of these other things that we are doing to invest in young people right now. But if we're not investing in their leadership and helping them to find their voice and helping them to use their voice in productive ways, if the children are our future and we're not investing in them to lead, then we're missing something. We're missing out on a great opportunity. And so I have been so delighted, Elaine, to have this conversation with you. What are your closing reflections as we get ready to close out the podcast today?
Well, I totally agree with you. I think that young people learning how important they are and their voices is critical. And I think right now at this point in time, many are believing that they don't have an impact. And so the more we can, at really young ages, 3, 4, 5, kindergarten, it's not just youth, it's children learning to say their views. Yes. And really understanding that they are being seen and heard is really critical. You asked about favorite authors, and Langston Hughes says, "Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free." And then he says, at the very end, "We the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, all the stretch of these green, great states, and make America again." And I think young people knowing that they're the ones to make America again is a power statement.
Yes. Thank you. And that is remarkable. Those words that he wrote so many years ago, quite visionary and definitely relevant for his time, but also relevant for ours at this time. Thank you so much, Elaine.
Thank you.
For being a guest on our podcast. We would love to have you back. And I'm also just extending an open invitation to a young leader who wants to be on the podcast. Hit us up. So that's a wrap for our second podcast episode. And I have to say, this has been a delight and a treat. I'm so grateful to Elaine for showing up so openly and thoughtfully. Conversations like this are exactly why we created this series, because we want to make space to really talk, to really listen and really see each other. So something has to shift, and that's civic engagement in its truest form. So before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to sit with. We asked our guest today to reimagine the American dream, or how she might be reimagining the American dream. And so I'm asking you, what does it look like for you, your family, your community? What would you keep? What would you change? And what would you build from scratch? I ask you to think about it. Talk about it with someone. And if you feel moved to get involved in your neighborhood, your town, your state, we hope this conversation is a little nudge in that direction. We'll be back soon with our next episode, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of this community we're building together. I'm Melvette Hill, and this has been a production of the Connecticut Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. Take care of yourselves and each other. Until next time.